Hey everybody, this video is going to go over the PowerPoint on Chapter 9, Process Analysis in the Week 5 module. So, we've already learned about exemplification paragraphs or evaluation paragraphs. This week we're also going to learn about process analysis paragraphs, right? So, every day we perform all kinds of activities that involve a process or like a series of steps that are carried out in a specific order. A lot of these processes are very familiar, very automatic, like tying our shoelaces, changing the bed sheets, using a vending machine, following a recipe, starting a car, right? And because we perform them every day, we don't necessarily always think about the sequence of steps that make up each activity. Now, maybe when we were learning to tie our shoelaces back when we were kids, we might have been very aware of the process, the steps you have to go through to get the shoelaces tied. Maybe the first time we cook a specific recipe, we're very aware of all the steps needed. But after a while, if you do that thing, if you perform that process on a regular basis, you tend to start kind of not really forgetting the steps, but just not thinking about the steps. But there are other times, even as adults, where we are painfully aware of the series of steps involved in a process. Like if we're asked to give directions to a particular place, we become very aware of the steps involved. If we're trying a new recipe, or playing a new video game, whatever the case may be, if it's new, we're pretty aware of the steps involved to get to the end goal, right? So a process can be defined as a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. Some synonyms for process might be procedure, operation, action, activity, task, exercise, undertaking. Those are all synonyms for process. All of those things involve a series of steps to get where you need to be, right? There are two types of process analyses. The first type is the how-to process analysis. So in a how-to paragraph, you are going to be giving the reader directions on how he or she can do something. So it's a series of steps that can be replicated to achieve an end goal. So how to accomplish a goal, how to apply to college, how to make tasty buffalo wings, right? So the purpose of this type of paragraph, the purpose of a how-to process analysis is to enable the reader to do something after they have read the paragraph. There's also how it works process analysis. It's more of an explanation paragraph. It is going to explain to the reader how a particular event occurred or how something works. So how an experience or an event can trigger a past trauma, or how a bill becomes a law. It's still a process, how a bill becomes a law. It is a process that can be described, but it's not something that the reader is going to go out and do after they have read your paragraph. So that's the difference. It's how to do it, or how it works. Just an explanation of the process, right? The key to preparing a process analysis paragraph is to think about what the activity you're describing, the process you're working with. Think about it as though you're doing it for the first time. Because to be successful, a good process analysis has to clearly explain each step of the process. So we've got an example on slides 6 and 7. Slide 6 gives you an example of a process paragraph where the steps are not clearly defined. It's about making pancakes, and you can read that paragraph. The next slide, slide 7, gives us the revised version of that process, using a topic sentence, putting the steps in the right order, creating transitions between the steps, and it makes so much more sense. Those clearly defined steps are so important. It's probably really obvious when you read that example, when you compare the pancake paragraph when it's all in disarray compared to how it is once it's revised. That's really easy to recognize why you have to have clearly defined steps. But when you're choosing a topic that isn't as cut and dry as a recipe, those steps might not seem as obvious to you. Or it might be, you might be more likely to skip steps because it's not as cut and dry as like a recipe is. Right, so we're going to take a look at a few sample process paragraphs. So the first is performing CPR. If someone nearby collapses and does not respond to shouting or shaking, performing these 3 steps of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR, could determine whether that person lives or dies. So they've already set us up. We know what process they're going to be describing. We already even know how many steps there are. There's 3. The first step is to call for help by dialing 911. If you are not certified to deliver CPR, keep the emergency dispatcher on the line to talk you through the next 2 steps until paramedics arrive. The second step, performing chest compressions, should occur if the victim remains unresponsive and has stopped breathing or is breathing abnormally. With one hand over your other hand, push down 2 inches with the heel of your hand on the center of the victim's chest. Compress the chest hard and fast 30 times. Then perform the third step, blowing air into the victim's mouth. Tilt his or her head back and lift the chin. Pinch the victim's nose closed, cover his or her mouth with your mouth, and blow until you see the chest rise. Provide 2 breaths, each 1 second long. Continue alternating 20 pumps with 2 breaths until help arrives. Remember that time is the enemy of someone who is not breathing. By following these steps to keep precious oxygen and blood moving through the victim's body, you may save a life. Very clear, right? Our next sample is recovering from addiction. Many experts believe that recovery from addiction, whether to alcohol or other drugs, has 4 main stages. The first stage begins when the user finally admits that he or she has a substance abuse problem and wants to quit. At this point, most people seek help from groups like Alcoholics Anonymous or treatment programs because few addicts can get clean by themselves. The next step is withdrawal, when the addict stops using the substance. Withdrawal can be a painful physical and emotional experience, but luckily it does not last long. After withdrawal comes the most challenging stage, making positive changes in one's life. Recovering addicts have to learn new ways of spending their time, finding pleasure and relaxation, caring for their bodies, and relating to spouses, lovers, family, and friends. The fourth and final stage is staying off drugs. This open-ended part of the process often calls for ongoing support or therapy. For people once defeated by addiction, the rewards of self-esteem and a new life are well worth the effort. All right, so both of those sample paragraphs, the first one on how to perform CPR, that was an example of a how-to process analysis. Because after we read it, we could then perform the steps for CPR. The second example, recovering from addiction, that's more of a how it works process analysis. I suppose you could say someone could repeat those steps, but that's not the purpose of explaining this process. The author's purpose in sharing the process is to simply inform us, to give us more information about the process, right? But notice that even though each paragraph represents a different type of process analysis, they both contain the same conventions, right? They both have a clear topic sentence. They both have supporting sentences that give us specific and adequate support. And they both have a concluding sentence. And they both contain clearly defined steps of the process, right? So the next few slides provide us with some examples of process paragraphs that are on the right track, but not quite where they need to be just yet. So the first one is called sneaking into the house at night. The first step I take is bringing my key along with me. Obviously, I don't want to have to knock on the door at 1:30 in the morning and rouse my parents out of bed. Second, I make it a point to stay out past midnight. If I come in before then, my father is still up, and I'll have to face his disapproving look. All I need in my life is for him to make me feel guilty. Trying to make it as a college student is as much as I'm ready to handle. Next, I'm careful to be very quiet upon entering the house. This involves lifting the front door up slightly as I open it so that it does not creak. It also means treating the floor and steps to the second floor like a minefield, stepping carefully over the spots that squeak when I'm upstairs. I stop briefly in the bathroom without turning on the light. Finally, I tiptoe to my room, put my clothes in a pile on a chair, and slip quietly into bed. With my careful method of sneaking into the house at night, I have avoided some major hassles with my parents. So it's not horrible, but there are some issues with it that we'll discuss here in just a few moments. The next sample paragraph is protecting the skin. Being exposed to the sun or ultraviolet light regularly or for long periods can harm a person's skin. It can even cause skin cancer. There are several things that can be done to prevent this. First, a person should stay away from tanning booths. They are simply not safe. They use ultraviolet rays, which over time can cause severe damage. Second, and for the same reason, a person shouldn't use sun lamps or sit in the sun with a shiny reflector under the chin. Many young people use artificial tanning devices or sit under sun reflectors to clear up their complexions. However, there are many safer methods to solve acne problems. Next, even if a person doesn't have fair skin, it's important to avoid exposure to the sun, especially during the hours of 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. when its rays are strongest. Finally, and most important, a person should wear a hat and cover both arms and legs when out in the sun for any length of time. In addition, he or she should use a sunscreen that has a sun protection factor, SPF, of 30. However, it should be remembered that many sun protectors wash off during swimming, so they must be reapplied. Also, it's worth noting that even the best sunscreen can't protect the human body from prolonged exposure. All right. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. Then our third example here is dealing with verbal abuse. If you are living with someone who abuses you verbally with criticism, complaints, and insults, you should take steps to change your situation. First, realize that you are not to blame for his or her abusive behavior. This may be difficult for you to believe. Years of verbal abuse have probably convinced you that you're responsible for everything that's wrong with your relationship. But that is a lie. If your partner is verbally abusive, it is that person's responsibility to learn why he or she chooses to deal with problems by saying nasty things. Perhaps he observed his father treating his mother that same way. Maybe she never learned any more positive ways to deal with negative emotions like anger, fear, or disappointment. Steps 2 and 3 need to be done one right after the other. Step 2 is for you to announce that you will no longer tolerate being verbally abused. State that you are a person who deserves respect and civil behavior and that you will accept no less. Next, offer to go with him or her to talk to a counselor who will help both of you learn new ways to communicate. While your partner learns to express his or her feelings without attacking you, you can learn to stand up for yourself and express your feelings clearly. If he or she refuses to take responsibility for changing abusive behavior, then you must consider step 4, to leave that person. You were not put here on earth to have your self-concept demolished by serving as someone else's verbal punching bag. Okay? So 3 different process analysis paragraphs. Let's take a look at some questions about them. The first question is, which paragraph lacks an opening topic sentence? Well, it was actually sneaking into the house at night. The first example, if you go back and look, that paragraph just starts off with, the first step I take is bringing my key along with me. There's no topic sentence to tell us what steps of what. We have the title of the paragraph, sneaking into the house at night, but that's not enough. That's not good enough. We need a topic sentence at the beginning of the paragraph that tells us what process is about to be explained. Right? Next question is, which 2 sentences in sneaking into the house at night should be eliminated in the interest of paragraph unity? Meaning, which 2 sentences are out of place and don't belong. Again, if we go back to that paragraph, when they get to the part about making sure they stay out past midnight, because if they come in before midnight, Dad will still be awake and I'll have to face his disapproving look. They then go on to say, all I need in my life is for him to make me feel guilty. Trying to make it as a college student is as much as I'm ready to handle. Those two sentences might relate to why they don't want to encounter their father when they come home late, but it has nothing to do with the process, how they come home late, how they sneak into the house at night. So those two sentences don't fit. They don't belong in this paragraph. They need to be taken out. Right? Next question. After which sentence in protecting the skin are supportive details or examples needed? Where we need more is when they say, next, even if a person doesn't have fair skin, it's important to avoid exposure to the sun, especially during the hours of 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. when its rays are the strongest. Then they just move right into the next step. They didn't follow that step up with any more explanation. So we need more supporting examples there. Which paragraph uses time order? So the two that use time order, right? Meaning you have to go through it in this particular order, would be sneaking into the house at night and dealing with verbal abuse. Those start with a specific first step, and you have to follow the order of the steps as they list them to perform the process correctly. Which paragraph uses emphatic order? That would be protecting the skin. There's no real time order to steps you can take to protect your skin. So in this case, they went with emphatic order, from the least important step you take to the most important step you take, right? And which transition words introduce the first, second, and third steps in sneaking into the house at night? Well, the first step I take is blah, blah, blah. Then second, blah, blah, blah. Next, blah, blah, blah. So you see those transition words, those little timestamps that are being used to guide us from one step to the next, to remind us the order of things and when we're getting to a new step, right? So we know that if we're doing a process paragraph, we have to explain each step clearly, right? And the key to doing that is to think about the activity as if you're doing it for the first time. So let's look a little bit more at how to develop a good topic and a good draft for a process analysis paragraph. So we're going to look at that dealing with verbal abuse paragraph that we already read. So it's the one that's on slide 14. We're going to look more at that one. Selma is the author of Dealing with Verbal Abuse. When she was given the assignment to write a process analysis paragraph, she started considering possible topics, and she soon focused on a situation from her own life, living with an abusive man. All right. When she was in that situation, at that time, she didn't know how to change her situation. But with counseling, she realized that there were steps she could take. That's what she decided she wanted to write about, that process, those steps that the counselor told her about, right? So the first thing she did after she was free writing about possible topics and free writing about this situation, she decided to make a list of the steps that she followed. And what she ended up with was, tell him you won't accept any more abuse, open your own checking account, apply for a credit card in your own name, offer to go with him to counseling, realize you're not to blame, learn to stand up for yourself, go into counseling yourself if he won't do it, call the police if he ever becomes violent, and leave him if he refuses to change. Those were all the steps that she came up with as she was just, free writing, using free writing techniques to list. She didn't necessarily list them in the correct order. She was just listing as many as she could think of as they came to her. Okay. Then she went back through that list, and she kind of did two things at once. The first thing she did was she crossed out any of the items on her list, any of the steps that she realized weren't really part of the process that she wanted to describe. And then with what was left, she numbered the remaining steps in the order that she wanted to talk about them. So in this case, she got rid of open your own checking account, apply for a credit card in your own name, and call the police if he ever becomes violent. That's not to say that those aren't steps of a process of leaving, an abusive relationship. Those just weren't part of the steps that she wanted to discuss in this particular paragraph. So she got rid of those, and then with what was left, she numbered the steps. She realized that the first thing you have to do is realize you're not to blame. The second thing you have to do is tell him you won't accept any more abuse. Offer to go with him to counseling. Go into counseling yourself, even if he won't do it. Learn to stand up for yourself and leave him if he refuses to change. Right? So now she has a better idea of what steps she wants to include and the correct order to discuss them in. So she kind of grouped them into 4 major steps. Realize you're not to blame. Tell the abuser you won't accept any more abuse. Go into counseling, preferably with him, and if necessary, leave him. So then she was ready to write her first draft, and you can find it on pages 204 and 205 of the textbook. After she wrote that first draft, she gave it to a classmate for their comments. And this is what the classmate's response was. In order for this to be a good process essay, I think you need to do a couple things. First, although the essay is based on what you went through, I think it's too much about your own experience. I'd suggest you take yourself out of it and just write about how any person could deal with any verbally abusive situation. Otherwise, this paper is about you and Harry, which is more of a narrative, not a process. So, because the process came from something that she personally experienced, her first draft still included all of that personal experience. And her classmate was like, I know that's the catalyst for this. That's what prompted you to choose this topic, and that's where your knowledge comes from. But this is supposed to be a process analysis, and if you don't take yourself out of it, then it's more of a story. It's more of a narrative, not a process analysis, right? Second, you need a clear topic sentence that tells the reader what process you're going to explain. So if you look at her first draft, she doesn't really have a clear topic sentence yet. And then he suggests that she use transitions like first and next to make the steps of the process more clear. Because as it is right now in that rough draft, all that information about her and Harry, the steps get lost. So she needs to make sure that she's using those transitions to keep the steps clear. So she read over her first draft again after she had read her classmates' comments, and she agreed. She agreed with the suggestions. So she revised, and she wrote the final version, which we read on slide 14, right? So using her process as an example, when you go to start writing your process paragraph, first thing you want to do is start free writing. You might need to free write or brainstorm just to come up with a topic. But when you have the topic in mind that you want to write on, free write about just that topic. Try to go for 10 minutes. Go longer if ideas keep coming to you. After you have done the free writing on that particular topic, you should know whether or not you've got enough material to write a full paragraph on it. If not, you might need to continue free writing, continue brainstorming to see if you can get more material for that topic, or you might need to choose another topic and then start the whole thing over again. Free write on that one. Make sure you have enough material. Once you have a topic and you have done the free writing and decided, yes, I have enough material to write a good process paragraph on this topic, then you can move on. The next step, get that topic sentence. Get it written. Even if you tweak it later, start, right? State the process that you're going to describe. Something like, my study skills instructor has suggested a good way to study for major exams. Or my technique for changing a bike tire involves 4 main steps. Again, you might come back and tweak it, but get that working topic sentence down so that it is stated clearly what process you're going to talk about in your paragraph. Okay? Then, once you have the topic sentence, list all the steps you can think of. All the steps you can think of that are included in that process. Don't worry about whether or not you're actually going to include all of them in the paragraph. Just list as many as you can think of, right? Then go through that list, cross off things that aren't really going to fit with the process you're wanting to describe. Maybe things that, are just little nitpicky details, or parts of the process, maybe it's just not the right focus, cross off the ones that you're not going to use, and then with whatever's left, number them in the order that the process occurs, right? Use that list as a guide to draft the paragraph, right? And if you think of new information along the way, don't hesitate to add it in. This is just a first draft, right? Then you're going to revise. Work on the big issues first. Make sure the topic sentence is clear. Make sure the process, the organization is clear. Make sure you've got good transitions, right? On slide 24, I actually have a checklist here for you. It's the 4 bases checklist to make sure that you have revised the paragraph and gotten it to its best form. So to make sure you have unity in your paragraph, do you have a clear topic sentence that tells the process that you're going to be describing? And is the rest of your paragraph on target in support of that topic sentence? You can answer yes to both, and hopefully that means you have a unified paragraph. For support, have I included all the essential information so that anyone reading my paper could follow the process, follow the same steps, or understand the process if you're doing how it works? If you can answer yes, then hopefully you've got good supporting sentences. Have you made the sequence of steps easy to follow by using transitions like first, second, then, next, during, finally? If you've used those time transitions or the sequence transitions, then hopefully that means you have good coherence. As for sentence skills, this is going to be the same for anything you write. Do I have a consistent point of view for verbs and pronouns? Have I used specific words rather than general or vague words? Have I been concise or did I get too wordy? Are my sentences varied? Do I show some complex writing or are they all short, choppy sentences? And then have I checked for spelling and other sentence skills like fragments, run-ons, misplaced and dangling modifiers, all that good stuff, right? But remember, sentence skills, that's the last thing you want to check. Make sure the unity, support, and coherence are there first, right? So without a doubt, you want to make sure that the paragraph is unified, supported, and coherent. And then you want to make sure you have good sentence skills. But don't forget the basic elements of writing, which is the rhetorical situation. Make sure you've got that focused topics. If you do the pre-writing, then you should have a focused topic. Your angle. I'm sure a lot of people have already written about your process. What's unique or different about your version of the process? How are you going to make this paragraph seem different? Okay. What's your purpose? Well, the purpose is tied into this one. Your purpose is to either explain to your readers how to do something or explain to your readers how something works. If you have followed the pre-writing steps and you have the supporting sentences there, your purpose is pretty much taken care of for this type of paragraph. Who is your audience, right? How do you want to write this paragraph in order to connect best with them? What type of tone is appropriate? Are we talking about a serious subject? Can you throw in some humor? What you make that decision based on your audience and your purpose, right? So don't forget those basic elements of writing. Yes, you got to have all those elements of a good process paragraph, but don't forget that basic foundation at the same time. Okay. If you have any questions about process analysis paragraphs, feel free to let me know. Come to me with any questions, or if you have any additional comments. Otherwise, you guys are free to move on to the next item in the module.